Hello, welcome to my basement. It is Monday, June 1st, and I am here to share with you a little Bible study based on the daily lectionary readings. My name is Bill Hennessy. I'm the pastor at North Presbyterian Church in Williamsville, New York, and we're starting the reading with the Gospel of Matthew. But I think I also want to share with you one of the Psalms for today. So let's start, though, first with the Gospel reading. This is Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 to 52. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then, in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets and threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, Yes. And he said to them, Therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. Okay, so those are kind of enigmatic, to say the least. Some of them make sense, are sort of are self-evident, I guess, to a certain degree. The kingdom of heaven, for instance, is like a treasure hidden in a field. This idea that the kingdom is something that is of value and just beneath the surface of our lives, of our existence. And when we get hold of it, when we catch a glimpse of what the world could be like, we want to do whatever we can to have it. You know, that one reminds me of the end of the movie When Harry Met Sally. Throughout that whole movie, of course, you see the progression of their relationship over time, from the time they left college to when they were, in their 30s, and you see, how their relationship develops, and they have this friendship, and it becomes a very close friendship. But then there's some other stuff, and they kind of have a falling out. But at the very end, and spoilers, I'm sorry about this, but it's When Harry Met Sally. It was a long time ago. If you haven't seen it by now, sorry. But at the very end, it's New Year's Eve. Sally is at a party alone, and he is at his apartment, kind of hanging out, and realizes he needs to be with her, and so he runs to get to see her. So she's in a ball gown, and he's in, his grubbies, and and he tells her that the reason he came to the party to be with her wasn't because he was alone, or he wanted to be with someone on New Year's Eve. He said the reason is because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with someone, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. And that's what the kingdom of heaven, that's what Jesus is describing, right? When you realize that this treasure is there, you want to do anything you can to get it, to have it. And again, the kingdom of heaven, like the pearl of great value. Again, this the merchant who will sell all that he has to buy it. The point, I think, is that we too often fail to see the kingdom of heaven in our midst. It's always there. And we take life too lightly, and we have too little regard for the goodness of things deep down, as the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins would say. And what I find interesting too about this is, after he says these things, he asks his disciples, have you understood all this? And they just say, yes, which I think is pretty clear they do not, and we don't either, really. Because even though we might be able to understand intellectually what Jesus is talking about, to experience it, that's a whole different matter. And the reality is, we live in a world where there is great injustice and great disparity and great suffering. And it can be hard to see the goodness of things in the midst of all that. I would be remiss not to mention the realities that we're experiencing right now in our country. This is June 1st, 2020. Over the last week, and probably into this week, we have seen and will see riots in many of our cities and communities because of the lynching of a man in broad daylight by the police in Minneapolis. That, as well as the experience of this pandemic that has driven so many people into their homes and forced so many others to work beyond normal circumstances and to put themselves into risky situations because of that, and knowing that the people who are dying from this disease are disproportionately black, there is great tension and anger and rage, really, in our country right now. And we've got we're being given no guidance, no leadership from our executive. So it's hard to see the kingdom in the midst of all that, and it's hard to witness to it when we are dealing with this upheaval. Jesus talks about the kingdom as a great net catching all sorts of fish. So there's this expansiveness about the kingdom. It encompasses everything and everyone. But then comes the job of separating what is good and from what is bad. And that's not our job. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're just supposed to celebrate the kingdom. Just take everyone in. But too often we want to separate. And when it comes to being in the place where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth, well, I think we're there. We're there. We're there largely, well, nearly entirely because of our own actions. I mean, we aren't responsible for the coronavirus, but we are responsible for the health outcomes of so many who are living in poverty, so many whose lives have experienced generations of poor treatment and lack of access to care. That's on us. And the more we do that kind of separating, the more pain and anger we generate. So this is in some ways holding out, I think, an ideal that if we were to experience it just a moment, we might want to embrace and work toward. But I fear there are too many folks in our country who, in fact, would not want to work toward that ideal. In fact, see that ideal as a threat to their own status. The reality is, in the kingdom of heaven, in order for there to be a sense of wholeness, some who have great privilege will have to give up that privilege so that others who are left out can be included. And that is the reality. And what makes it the kingdom of heaven is when it comes to giving up that privilege, it is a joy to do. A joy to see those who've been left out included, rather than to be resentful and angry about that. So, the kingdom of heaven is largely about attitude. It's about how we approach others in the world, how we regard those different from ourselves, those who are treated as less deserving. What makes the kingdom real is when we are able to overcome our feelings of resentment and our desire to hold on to our status and give it up. Allow ourselves to be emptied. So I think that's what lies behind these parables, if you will, metaphors, or however we want to characterize what Jesus is saying here, these descriptions of the kingdom. They are challenging, not because they are sort of hard to get our minds around, but because they pose a challenge to our very place in the world. They challenge us, those of us who look like I look, who come from the kind of background that I have had, and ask people like us to step aside, to make room, to give up. And that's part of the kingdom. And the real challenge, I suppose, is that we do that with joy. We do that gladly. We do it because in doing it, we become more who we're meant to be. And so can enter that kingdom alongside others who've been neglected and excluded. Now, I mentioned the psalm. There are two psalms, well, two morning psalms and two evening psalms, but the first psalm for the day, I read it earlier and thought, gee, this would be worth at least sharing, especially in the circumstances we're finding ourselves. And again, it's important to think metaphorically about these images because they sound personal, but they are, I think, more circumstantial than they are personal. So give it a listen. This is Psalm 57. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until the destroying storms pass by. I cry to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He will put to shame those who trample on me. God will send forth his steadfast love and his faithfulness. I lie down among lions that greedily devour human prey. Their teeth are spears and arrows, their tongues sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make melody. Awake, my soul, awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations. For your steadfast love is as high as the heavens. Your faithfulness extends to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. The storms, the lions, the enemies, however you want to characterize this, it strikes me these are the realities that we are contending with now. They're all around us. When we are all engaged in this, we are all sort of dealing with these forces that have led to the lynching of George Floyd, the lynching of Breonna Brown, the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery. These horrible, horrible acts that are rooted in white supremacy, which is threatening to devour us. We must get out from under this. And the only way, perhaps, is for us to put aside our own concentration on ourselves and our own well-being, and look to the well-being of others and recognize who we are in the sight of God. So I encourage you to meditate on that psalm and give yourselves a chance to think about what is happening around us today in light of God's kingdom, in light of that desire for a world of wholeness and shalom. And find ways to get hold of it, to find that pearl of great price, and give up everything you can to have it. Be well today, and continue to be safe, and I will see you again soon.